who are here to discuss the report and its findings. I want to give a special shout out to our male allies, Kunal, Sunil, and VT, for putting themselves in the line of fire today. Thank you to all of you for being our champions.
I extend that shout out. And we have GPs from marquee funds who will be sharing their insights from the report. So, again, a special shout out to the male champions. We have with us Kunal Shroff, managing partner at ChrysCapital. We have with us Sunil Mishra, partner, primary investments, Adam Street Partners, and VT Bharadwaj, co founder and general partner with A91 Partners. And I'm not forgetting the women champions, and we have with us Bala Deshpande, founder and partner, Mega Delta Capital, and we have Shweta Jalan, managing partner at Advent International. Welcome, folks, and over to you to discuss the report and the insights.
Thank you for being with us today. And I really look forward to a no-holds-barred discussion over the next 45 minutes around diversity challenge, but also what do you see as some of the solutions for the industry going forward. As we all saw from some of the data in the report, significant progress has been made, but there are, of course, gaps that remain. And I'd like to touch upon these with you, both from your vantage points as senior industry leaders, but also for some of you from your own personal experiences and learnings that you've had. Shweta, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. As we went through the interviews and the discussions, many women that we spoke to mentioned that they sometimes struggle with the perception of being a diversity hire, especially in firms where the gender ratios are low. I'd like to just explore this thought with you here. How real do you think this issue is, first of all, and how do firms and leaders, as well as the women themselves, deal with it in your view?
Shweta's on mute.
Shweta, I think you're on mute.
Kanchana, I think you're on mute now.
I am so sorry. So I was saying, Bala, maybe we'll come to you first while Shweta is sorting out the tech issues. One of the other themes or perceptions that we heard was around investing being a bit of a macho business and executives in the business having maybe more aggressive personalities, harder hours, travel, etc. Hence the question sometimes on how suited is this for women and for longer term success of their careers? Just what's your view on this and how should one deal with this? Again, from both vantage points of being, a leader in the business as well as, being a woman who's done it yourself.
Sure. I think I would actually like to say that I don't think that many firms think that it's a macho business. I think there is, in fact, a lot of support that we have seen. I mean, I've been in this is my third firm in investing. And I don't think that issue really prevails among, I would say, definitely our peer group. I would say that it may exist in some kind of entrepreneur or companies or corporates which are slightly old world, and it may translate into you being questioned about whether you can handle an aggressive entrepreneur because you are not aggressive. So I think it's a very nebulous and a very amorphous kind of a perception that we have to sometimes deal with. But I would say this, right? I think my personal belief is that no function or role or in investing is actually gender based, right? It is a very, very finely tuned art of investing, to which you bring perspective, you bring your collective wisdom, and then you basically invest and make money. So I think the issue is not so much the perception of aggressiveness or late hours or any of those, but I think what I feel is a genuine issue is are women really comfortable after entering a firm being in the middle, coming up to the middle management, and then going up to the seniority level? What does it take to go from being a good management executive in an investing firm to becoming a general partner, or the becoming the leader? And that is what I think even the BCG report is reflecting it, in the terms of the drop off that happens at the middle at the middle management level. So my question, and partly my answer too, is that, is inclusion, is the inclusion that is happening, and increasingly so, is it a mere demographic statistic to meet a stated corporate goal? Or is there a real behavioral, psychographical change that has happened among all people, including the women themselves, to make this a gender agnostic role? So I do not think that any of the favorite catechisms, right, that women have more empathy, women can multifunction, this is a macho role, this is aggressiveness, you have to be tough to deal with hardcore entrepreneurs. None of them matter. What really matters, according to me, is that, has the firm really included the woman employee, so to speak, in its true sense. So when I'm presenting a case in the IC, let's say, nobody's looking at me as Bala, a woman presenting, but Bala with, Deshpande, the investor that is presenting or propagating a case. So I think that is really the most important question that I think is not being answered, because we don't know whether all these women who have come into the industry are they really feeling included. But I would also say that the answer also lies in the woman herself. I think we have come to the stage, after raising awareness about this issue, about frameworking solutions, about talking about gender sensitivity, and training the men folk, as we say. All that is good, but I think the final onus lies on the women to say that yes, these perceptions exist, but I don't have to answer to them. I don't have to react to them, but I have to own and live my truth. That is, I'm an investor and I'm here to deliver returns for my investors. So I think that is really where I would say that I would urge the women to start shifting, because these perceptions will surface somewhere, right? They'll surface in a board meeting where you feel you've been talked down to, or there is, you've not been, you do not make it to the list of potential partners. You are not even considered for it. So they creep up somewhere, but somewhere you have to take a call saying that it doesn't matter. I'm still going to make it in this space in my own way. I think we're reaching that stage now.
Yeah, yeah. And, I'm really glad to hear you say that, Bala. There's always this, this thought process around what women are good at and what men are good at. And, after 20 plus years in the corporate sector myself, it's always amazed me how, we can have generalizations about an entire gender. At the end of the day, it's always about an individual. And part of what we found as we went through the discussions, I think the perception fixing also starts to happen when you have more senior women, and particularly in decision making and leadership roles. I think that's what sets off the culture of everyone feeling included, and maybe part of where where this heads to. I can see.
Shweta, you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfectly.
Oh, excellent.
Okay. I think, Shweta, my question originally for you was also around perceptions, right? Just building off from what Bala was just talking about. I think one of the themes we've heard about is this theme of being a diversity hire, but honestly, at the root of it is the similar perception issue that that Bala was describing. So it'll be good to get your inputs on this as well.
Yeah. So I think, the where it starts is really the communication the firm makes around these hires, right? Obviously, diversity is a buzzword, and everybody is trying to increase diversity in their teams. But the communication really has to be, why are we doing these hires, right? Because genuinely we believe that rather than have a homogeneous set of male, or it is male candidature, or no ethnic diversity or whatever, leads to not poorer decision making, or but not as good a decision making if you have a more diverse pool, right? So there is genuinely enough studies available to say that if you have a diverse pool, you have better outcomes, you have better outputs, you have better decision making, right? And I think that is where the communication really has to start from the top of the firm. Once you start there, and then really that is why you say we want to increase diversity in the firm, right? Then it doesn't become about we just need to somehow fill the our pool with diverse candidates, right? That is what Advent as a firm is also focused on, and we've also communicated top down that that is the reason we need diversity. After that, of course, you still could battle perceptions, once you enter the firm, because obviously we are all trying to increase the gender diversity in each of our firms. So there is, I would say, somewhat a murmur around that are we sort of almost doing a little bit of bias in the other direction where we are force fitting candidates, right? But frankly, if the communication is there and it's consistent, and then people finally see the delivery and the outputs, I think over time it will go. Will it go away overnight? I think the answer is absolutely no. In the initial phase, as we are trying to correct, as the BCG study was saying, where at the associate analyst level, we are, pretty not bad as an industry, but at a senior level, we are really poor when you look at the metrics, right? There will be this initial issue. But I think over time there will be a correction if the consistent communication is there top down from the group, from the firms, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's aligned with what Bala was talking about as well, which is just some of these changes take time. And yes, there are some perceptions to deal with in the interim, but it settles down as people see results and the outcomes of actually promoting gender diversity in the workplace. Maybe Kunal, if I switch to you now, you've been trying to promote gender diversity, I'm sure, as one of the leaders in your firm. It'll be interesting to hear about, are there any challenges or any pushback that you've heard when you've tried to promote gender diversity? How do you overcome this? And are there some interventions as you are going through this process yourself as a leader that you found particularly helpful?
Yeah. Thank you, Kanchan. First, I would say that, look, measurement is the first step to improvement. And I would say kudos to WinPE and BCG for continuing to shine a light on gender diversity with this report, right? There's clearly a lot more awareness on gender diversity and the positive impact that diversity brings. Shweta talked about it as well. And at ChrysCapital as well, we really foster diversity of opinions and perspectives, and therefore everybody gets it. That gender diversity will add to the quality of our discussion, better decision making, and all of that. So I don't think there's a pushback as such to say, why are we trying to promote gender diversity? I think everybody gets that. The bigger issue is how do you make it happen in practice versus just saying that you're supporting it, right? And Nupur talked about it as well. I mean, we are one of the laggards here. We've been around for a very long period of time, but clearly, our gender diversity is much lower than where we would like it to be. So what are some of the interventions that we are doing? Better late than never. I would say that, there are a few areas to it, and it has to be driven from the top, right? Because it's a change for the organization, and you want to make sure that there's a buy-in at the highest levels, and therefore there's a buy-in across the organization. Now, some of these interventions may seem very small, but in the context of, for example, what BCG said on flexible hours, right? Is it just lip service? Is it just a policy? And the people who end up using it are, kind of wondering whether they're doing the right thing for their career progression, right? We started a mini kind of work from home even before COVID was around, and everybody took advantage of it, right? The partners, the senior folks, the junior folks as well. We are currently in hybrid thanks to COVID. Everybody is, doing it in the way that works for them. So when you see the signaling coming positively from the senior people, it makes it more comfortable for everybody else. This is a really, really minor point. I'll give you another point on recruiting, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges we face. The same point that Roshni made around lateral versus the junior levels. Like most firms, it's been at the junior levels, but 10 years ago, even the candidate pool wasn't really there. The feedback would be, you want me to hire a good candidate, the talent pool is very weak. Now we don't get that message, right? The biggest places we recruit from, consulting firms, investment banks, are very well populated with really high quality female candidates. And so we are making sure that that message is given to the folks driving the screening process itself, who are then giving the message to the recruiting firms. I think these are some of the things that you have to do to start making an impact. But I completely agree, there's a long, long way to go. And then the last thing I would say that, clearly we need the people at the top to believe in it and evangelize it within the firm, rather than leave it to, the few women that maybe they're in the industry or in your firm to do it. And that's a constant effort that we're working on.
I'm happy to add to that, Kunal. I think all important points, and just a couple of things that I have seen work well. Both in terms of what we're trying to do at A91, where at this point in time I would say we are laggards in terms of ability and having enough diversity at the mid and the senior level, and my prior experience at Sequoia, where I think we did a pretty good job in having in the growth team we had 2 women early hires who became mid-level and senior, and one of whom is now an MD, and one of whom is leading growth in another private equity firm. So looking at those 2 examples, 3 things I think worked well for us. One is internally, whenever we communicate diversity, we say it's gender diversity and all kinds of diversity. I think that has been good for both hiring. That also makes sure that when we speak to recruiters, they are careful about the language they use. And on occasion, we have had a situation where one of our women, folks in the firm was involved in the next hiring, the next time when we were trying to hire somebody. And I remember at the end of the process is when she really came and said, VT, I've been in the firm for 3-4 years. Now I really feel I was not a diversity hire. I was as good, if not better, than somebody else. So sometimes I feel shining the sunlight on the recruitment process, because it's not like an opaque process, right? And as senior people, you can open it up to younger people, even as the process evolves, for them to realize, hey, look, the standard and the bar is the same. It's just about looking and looking harder and looking more deeper. So that is something that has worked well. And I think that's a part of the whole, I would say, if you want to champion the cause, you should allow sunlight in the process, and I think that helps candidates get confidence and people feel comfortable. The second is when we draft these policies, get folks to draft policies and communicate it. Communicate it throughout. Communicate it in an analyst orientation, communicate it at the time of orientation, and finally, push people to demonstrate. I'm very proud that, one of our younger partners, became a father, and he actually took a meaningful chunk of the 6 months, which was eligible for him. Until he did that and demonstrated that, I think it would be hard. Otherwise, it always becomes a maternity leave conversation, right? As though like taking care of babies is only the mother's responsibility, right? So I think you need to see policy in action. You need to encourage people. And if there are snide remarks passed around it, you have to kind of cut it very fast. Because otherwise, if people don't demonstrate policy, senior people don't demonstrate policy through action and are proud about, showing up in the office 3 days after the baby is born, I think that is disastrous. I think that's just a big moral deflator. You can have all the great policies in the world, but then it really feels like many of these policies were designed only for, one set of people. So I think second is just demonstrating action. Have few policies, but just make sure that people follow it, especially senior people. And that is, I would say, really worked well for us. And the third thing that has helped is, some sort of mentorship and identifying mentors, for younger and even mid-level, senior folks. And here I hate to say this, but we've realized, at least I've realized, that you need to find senior women mentors, because how much ever of a champion I may be, I just don't relate to some of the challenges. I can neither articulate it nor really, be truly empathetic about it. I can talk about it, like in a panel like this, but I don't really get it. And thankfully, one of the women colleagues actually told me that, saying, hey, you just don't get it. So can you just find me someone senior woman whom I can talk to? Because then I'll figure out how to do this. Especially, first baby or second baby or older parents who need care. She said, you just don't get it. So can I just talk to somebody? So I think you have to be, have the conversation, and then I think then it really becomes possible to champion and help help women.
Thanks, VT. Very relevant set of comments, and I was just reflecting back on I think in my firm, we made this journey a little while back. But one of the first things that we did was exactly what you were describing, which is when we sat down to write the flex time policy, for example, I was not the only person. I was in a team with 4 other men. And, along with some of the women starting to take it, we really went out of our way to encourage a few men to actually take it. Because at the end of the day, it's about normalizing it. It's not about maternity benefits. It's about anyone being able to deal with the personal situations that come up, honestly, for both genders. It's so that's a very important point that you've made there. And maybe partly also just switching into a slightly different conversation, I think part of which you already started talking about, VT, but this issue about accelerating the representation of women at the mid and particularly the senior level roles in private equity, in venture capital. I think hiring could be one of the answers, lateral hiring. As many of you have noted, the pools are getting better that you recruit from. But I'd like to believe that's not the only answer, right? There is also an important point around retention, and actually, now that we are starting to get women in at the mouth of the funnel, how do you actually make sure that they go through and get to the top, and you have the same 40% ratio at the senior level a few years out. So maybe it'll be helpful to get commentary. Maybe VT, you can start, and I'll be interested to hear about this from other panelists as well.
Yeah, no, I think this is a knotty, complex problem. Nupur articulated it because many firms, we think of this as an apprenticeship business, and therefore there is always going to be the question of, do you just wait for time, trickle down or trickle up effect, and then say, hey, look, there'll be enough representation. Can you do something proactively? Don't have any answers or practical experience here, but a couple of ideas is, I think on lateral hiring, one of the things to learn from could be from other firms that have done a better job, or other professions like consulting, which I feel thought about this issue for longer and maybe have even solved for it far more successfully than us. Private equity at the end of the day in India is still maybe an 18, 20-year-old profession versus consulting, which has been on for at least 25, 30 years. So one is, I think we could learn from there because they would have had very similar challenges. I think that's one. Second is, I wonder whether even lateral hiring, even if you're not able to hire somebody straight away in as investing, does it make sense to, look at alternate roles? Is it like is it operating partner roles where it may be easier, to find pools of candidates who have done that? If you're looking for, an operating partner in tech, is that easier to find versus straight away in investing? Because otherwise, you'll just be poaching from other firms. And we heard that in one of the, WinPE, one of the WinPE meetings, right? Where literally, one private equity firm was like, we really groomed this candidate and you hired this person as a principal. And of course, said in a jocular fashion, but it was articulated. So then otherwise, how do you create more folks here? Otherwise, you're just looking around. I wonder whether that also is an interesting way of thinking about lateral hires. Now, that is going to be complicated because you're going to have to navigate 2 steps. Like you first say, hey, you bring in the person for something, and then over a period of time, this person begins to do investing. But I've seen that work. We have had folks who have come in for business development or operating partner in a few portfolio companies, board positions in 3-4 companies, and eventually becoming an investor in the firm. I wonder whether that could be, another way of, helping accelerate the number of mid-career, or let's say more mid-level, folks on the private equity side. But would be curious to hear, what others have to say and add.
I'd like to add here. I mean, honestly, I actually slightly disagree with VT here because I feel, if we give that opportunity to fudge that, then, all of us will go down that path because that's an easier route to take, right? So you have to, tackle the problem absolutely upfront, right? And which is why, I think the thing that we discuss internally a lot, at least, and lateral hires are tough because, like you rightly said, it's a younger industry. Within that, I mean, when we go out, and we've had this discussion multiple times with headhunters, right? We have this Rooney rule across the firm now. I mean, the equivalent of the Rooney rule, right? Like NFL has, where you have to have some ethnically diverse candidates every time you hire. So for us, it's gender diversity. You have to see some diverse candidates. But, we do find that top of the funnel is weak, right? I think the way to cut it is the other point you made, VT. So you really have to expand your horizons. If you're committed to this cause, you have to be slightly flexible and think about how do I, find the best consultant or the best banker and really get them on board. And maybe there's a little bit of a lead time in getting up there. And even though you're hiring them at mid-level, But if they're really smart, frankly, they will get there, right? So I think that's the way you have to tackle it, because the moment anybody gives any of us flexibility, right, as people running firms, we will go and find the next best alternative, and we'll be sitting and discussing the same thing 5 years later. I can guarantee you. So I genuinely feel that's the way to tackle it, as opposed to try and find alternate ways like operating partners or business development people, so to speak.
If I may just add a perspective which is going to be a little more, I understand where VT is coming from. See, there's a culture aspect to it as well, and what the firm stands for, right? So we are very happy that over the last 4 or 5 years, we've really pushed the top of the funnel for associate hiring, and that 40% ratio. We are happy that at least we're there from something that would have been non-existent earlier. But clearly, it's not solving in the short run the leadership gap, right? Now, the challenge we have, this is more for ChrysCapital thing, but it's true as Nupur and Rochelle talked about. Most firms have tended to recruit at junior levels and groom from within as their culture, right? ChrysCapital has probably done it more than most. So if I give you a perspective, today we have partners and managing directors on average who've been with the firm for 20 years. 6 out of 7 of us joined as associates, right? That's a very powerful point in building a strong culture and sending a strong message to someone who wants to build a long-term career in the industry, saying, hey, you can join as an associate and become a partner at ChrysCapital, right? The flip side of it is, and to talk about lateral hires, in the last decade, we've hired one person above the VP level, one person, right? So if we suddenly change and hire laterally, right, what does that do to our culture? What does that do to the people who joined at the bottom and tried to rise up? I don't have an answer. Just as VT said, we don't have an answer to this, right? At the same time, it's not something that we should just say, okay, we're solving it in that 20-year time frame, and therefore we've done our bit, let's go away. So I like VT's suggestion of looking at other suggestions and role models. If you're happy hiring from consulting and investment banking with 2 years of experience, why not 10 years of experience? And continue to push that envelope. But I think we will have to traverse a path to get there.
Yeah. So I'd like to add a very different perspective here, which will probably lead to Sunil finally, is that I think if you look at our industry, it is changing character, right? What Shweta talked about, or what Chris Cap is talking about, or what BT talked about is Sequoia A91. If you look at the number of new GPs that have happened in the last 5 years in our country, it's amazing. And Rochelle is a classic example, right? Lighthouse Funds is she's a senior person. It's relatively new. I won't say that it doesn't belong to the bulge bracket parts of or the global bulge bracket. Global bulge bracket funds. So as we change the structure of the industry in our country, and this is willy-nilly happening whether we like it or not, we are going to see younger GPs with women as leaders coming in. I truly believe that is one way to solve for it, because otherwise we are simply fishing in the same pond over and over again. All I'm saying is a pond is becoming a lake. Someday it will become, part of the ocean. And that's when we'll also literally be forced to say that, okay, hey, there is that successful entrepreneur. She sold her business. Why can't I take her as a general partner? And that's why I said, this will also be, why I said it will go to Sunil ultimately, is when LPs start looking at these GPs and say, hey, I can look at this first time fund or second time fund and I can fund them. We will start solving this problem in a rather out of box manner. That's, I think, is how I read the tea leaves, at least on this topic. Yeah.
No, thank you, Bala. So the only point that I would wanted to add here is that this is a long duration asset class. Okay, so there's only so many things you can do in short run and for short term. And as people grow within the firm and become more senior, there are two aspects to that. One is it is such an opinion and judgment business that there's a lot of inter-partner trust that is required in making those decisions and monitoring those decisions and also living with it in case they go wrong. Okay, so this is a very high trust role. at senior levels. And that is why, some tenure and some shared history is very important, so that, it doesn't end up in a blame game. And that is why, I'm not surprised people want to see people serve their time before they get to that level, and they can fully trust them, lead things, and make those decisions on the fly in the so-called the investment battlefield. And the second related aspect is that, if you're trying to do little too much too soon, it can probably destabilize partnership, which is something that, the firms would not want to have. And secondly, definitely would not want to come and explain to the LPs, what really happened. So I would say, we should definitely explore lateral hires. We have seen this in many firms, not as much in India, but definitely outside India, where what VT said, people come in an operating partner role, or they come as, as a kind of an operating role at a portfolio level or at a sector level. And if they have the investment chops and inclination, they actually make that lateral transition. So I think we have seen that it is not unheard of. It is very easily doable, definitely expands the pool. And I would say Indian private equity has finally reached that level where, operating value add is kind of becoming very relevant to what people do. It's just not bankers and, deal sourcing at this stage.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. I think the point of diversity, we are discussing gender diversity today, but I think as you look at recruiting pools, there is a broader point about diversity as well. Similar to what you all are describing, I think consulting also at one point used to be people join as associates and become partners, but we've changed a lot over the last 10, 15 years, and a significant ratio of partners now have actually been laterally hired at different stages in their career. So maybe it's also an evolution of as the sector starts to move and the pools keep on expanding, because it does give you access to other forms of diversity as well, not just gender diversity. But maybe I'll switch questions now to to a topic that has come up from women who are currently working in private equity, not so much about expanding the funnel. And it'll be good to get a perspective on this, I think, both from our male and female champions on the panel. But the question was around how do you make sure that evaluation processes as well as career advancement, actually the process becomes truly gender neutral and accounts for various life stages for all employees, right? I think a lot of this discussion is around women, but it could just as well even apply to men. But how do you make all of these processes, truly gender neutral and not just on paper or on policy was really the question. Yeah. Shweta, would you like to start?
Sure. So, I think it's a little bit of, time that will make it completely gender neutral, but I think there is some level of training, consciousness that goes into this, right? So obviously, I think VT said that at some point in time, and that's true, right? It's not easy for everybody to kind of envision at sort of their own various stages of life as to what the counterparty's issues could be, right? A young mid-level VP to understand what a younger VP or associate will need because she may be getting married or he may be getting married. I think it just may be harder, right? So I think there is a fair bit of training that should also go into it, is my belief, and we do that. Part of it is just unconscious, bias training that we have to go through. Part of it is the reverse of that, just understanding, right? Whether it could be that you're getting married or you're having kids or you have older parents to take care of. There could be 5 or 7, things that could be at that life stage of yours that requires some cooperation, right? So I think it's something that people will grow and learn once they hear or get trained to understand it. And then I think it becomes an integral part of the culture of the organization. And some of this also comes from, again, some people articulated that very well here, right? The men and the women following that same pattern, whether it is the men taking the entire paternity leave, so that is just seen as something normal. Men using the flexible work hours as much as the women are using it, right? And these are very, very powerful examples because frankly, the biggest challenge you have is you are doing something different. Are you taking a maternity leave when nobody else is taking a paternity leave? It's really challenging, right? And we've all been there, seen that, right? Because you feel, are you one falling behind? 2, are people thinking you will get favored? So moment it becomes a little more sort of something everyone does in the organization becomes very, very acceptable, right? At least till such time you have enough senior women in the organization who, you can follow the lead from, and that will take a while. So I think having that sort of as a pattern setting eventually will definitely make people realize what the imperatives of various stages are, and probably incorporate that in the evaluation process as well.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so I just like to make a quick point here. I think Shweta put it very well. I think the point really also is about general interviewing techniques, right? I think we tend to put a partner in the room and say that okay, yeah, go higher. But what I do think can really help as an organization is we clearly define what are we really looking for in that from that hire, right? What is the kind of person, the personality, and I'm not talking gender, I'm talking about the attributes, competencies, experience, etc., etc., so that the focus and the focal point shifts to competencies rather than asking questions which are more to do with uh, ability to travel, ability to or ability to what happens if if you're planning a baby, etc., etc. I think that is a lens shift that I think the overall industry needs to develop. Not that we're not doing it, but I think somewhere the tendency is to ask that question. But if you're really saying that, hey, I'm looking for somebody with deep tech investing experience, then you better put a competent person who can evaluate that person on for tech investing rather than have this general interviewing style kind of a thing. I think that there is some work to be done there overall. I mean, I'm saying this not just for the PE industry, but I'm saying this for even many of the companies that we back, right? I think there is a general lack of or not lack. There's a lot of work to be done on the interviewing skills and patterns, which I think will also go a long way in removing this inbuilt biases towards potential women hires.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I would like to add is, Adam Street as a global firm, we have, good gender balance. It's not something that we deliberately went for, but we ended up having one. And we have it across all levels. I would say our industry actually affords the possibility of people being judged only on results, not on trying to, whether you're clocking the hours, whether you're there or not. It's about insight, it's about results, it's about focus, it's about getting things done. So people will understand that if these are small team environments, people understand you're going through various stages, but if you are delivering good output on your work, I think what we have seen is that you can actually create appraisal system which is very focused on outcomes rather than trying to disadvantage people or any gaps that might have. So I think our industry has a unique ability to be able to do that. You can actually be effective from many places. You can actually be somewhere else. And COVID actually taught us that not all of us need to be in office all the time to getting things done.
Yeah. Sunil, while I have you, there is one audience question I will pick up as well, which perhaps you're in a better position to answer. But the question is, are there any reservations or reluctance that you've seen across firms on mandating, sort of the tracking of this, right? KPIs, KRAs, whatever you call it, on diversity? And if so, what's the reason?
No, not at all. Actually, we actually find that this is what I call very intellectually stimulated asset class. And people really want to do really good work, and if they want to come across as savvy, smart, and create difference, create find great deals, do great stuff with the companies. So actually, we do not find that. To be honest, this conversation has come to the fore over the last 2.5 years. But the take-up rate at the GP level to be able to go and work at it has been phenomenal. Actually, maybe 15 years ago, there was not enough of talent pool to get in. But we see very high level of acceptance across all markets where people want to actually drive it. Interestingly, the non-investment roles actually had very good gender representation. So I think the work that needs to be done is the investment roles. And I don't think we saw pushback from almost anywhere in the world. Yeah.
Got it. No, that's very helpful. And I think that's consistent with what we saw amongst all the senior interviews we did as well. So maybe I have one question now for the male panelists who are with us today. But what does a good male champion of gender diversity look like for you? What kind of actions do you believe as a male role model you can take, which actually encourages this within your business and more broadly, for the sector? Happy with anyone to go first.
I can go first, before VTC steals all my thunder with all his great examples. So, not to be honest, have given a lot of thought. I think in my mind, a good role model is somebody who's, first of all, who's very well received by everyone, so he needs to be very fair and very objective. And that is probably is the backbone of role model here, because the first question that we addressed today, we don't want people to be pigeonholed into kind of diversity hire or people getting any kind of favor. So he needs to be very fair, very consistent. There are some behavioral attributes, having spoken to people over many years, I think these are some of the, I would say, general leadership trait, but definitely help in this regard. You got to be very inclusive, very open, very approachable, and to be very honest, very receptive about new ideas, what can be done. A little bit of empathy, active listener, and very good at social conversations, to be honest. I think this kind of help people who are finding their feet, giving them an opportunity and chance to kind of get to their soft points, and you need to be able to engage and include folks in discussions. I think sometimes there is here when there is this concept of, am I the only one here or am I the only two people here? People need to be engaged in that conversation and should feel like they got their say, they had their point of view taken note of. So those are some of the behavioral attributes, but I'll let Viti and Kunal add. I think these guys are practicing it a lot more.
I can add.
I also go.
I
also go before VT steals the show.
Go ahead.
No, I actually don't have that much more to add. I think we spoke about walking the talk a little bit, making sure that policies are not meant for a set of people, but are firm policies, right? And it doesn't have to only apply to gender, right? It can apply to diversity of all kinds. There's the other thing, which is what I said, in male-dominated firms, you need to do extra. You can't just leave it to what the normal is, because you're trying to push the envelope. And that means actively pushing the agenda. VT made that point, to make sure that when somebody is making some snide remark here, you can't laugh it out. You can't just brush it under the carpet. So you need to be extra focused on ensuring that this is something that the firm really prioritizes. But I think what's even more important is to make sure that the culture embraces that diversity, right? So it should not be something that the partners want because it sounds good, or the partners want because Sunil is pushing us. It should be because it's in the interest of the firm. And everybody should first buy into that. And that job also belongs to the partners, to ensure people understand that we are all pulling in the same direction. Once that is set in place, I think everything else becomes a lot easier, because there is no us versus them here, right? So I think that is very critical. Also, as somebody mentioned to me, when you're going down the straight fairway, it's much easier. When you're trying to change behavior, you need to have somebody senior who has the authority and is pushing that agenda, which is, again, what you can do from the top. So take the leave, take the maternity leave, take the flex hours leave, ensure that your evaluation process is as transparent as possible. We have less of the issue right now because we have the bigger problem where our gender diversity is at the associate level. So it's a lot easier to say, we don't have much of a gender gap, we don't have much of a career progression gap. These are problems that will come to us, as people rise through the organization. But I think that's all I had to add.
Happy to go last. Kanchan, unless you have some other question, and did you want to move forward? I was thinking and reflecting on what Sunil and Kunal said. A couple of things that came to my mind. I think one is, if you're working with women colleagues, and especially younger women who are trying to move forward and who are trying to really become senior. I think what has helped, and of course I'd actually like the women to answer this, but I think what has helped is career advancement conversations. As opposed to generic conversations around what does it take to succeed, or what does it take to be a good investor. Saying, hey, what does it take for me to be a principal? What will it take for me to be an MD? and giving very clear direction that also forces the firm to be sharper in what will it take for them to become successful. But having them, I think, has helped. I think that has something that has certainly helped colleagues navigate. Second is, I think, the point that Kanchan you already mentioned, which is whenever any generalizations are made, really react strongly, right? Because normal distributions are great for theoreticians and academic folks, right? We are really talking about individuals. So as much as possible, just avoid that conversation. Third is a bit controversial, and I'll put it out there. I think that I have noticed that older successful men do need coaching / feedback on how things are changing in terms of language, in terms of biases, in terms of what is acceptable, and Shweta's laughing. Shweta, this has nothing to do with that. But I'm just saying I've noticed in a more generic context, because the way they would describe, parenting. First of all, I don't think of maternity leave as a leave. I think it should be rebranded as maternity work. I think that's like the biggest, the worst thing that we could have done. Classic, misnaming something which is actually a lot harder work than going on a holiday, right? So I think it's about that as well. And I think, and maybe Shweta is right, it's about having those bias trainings and pushing people to take that, because things are changing rapidly around the world, and I can see, even I struggle with how things are changing. So I can see why it would be harder for older people.
Thank you for that. Maybe just have a minute or two if Bala or Shweta, you want to add on anything on what you expect to see from a male role model. Any additional thoughts?
So I shall be controversial and say I actually don't believe in role models, because honestly, I think, like, to pick on what VT just finished with, there is so much change. I mean, are we really relevant to today's world? I mean, I think whether it is female or male, I'm not just talking about anybody. I think that the challenges that the youth will face as they come into our industry will be far different from what I went through. Yes, but the only one line suggestion that I can give to everyone as a mentor is, just believe that you are doing what you wanted to do, and you'll be successful at it. But everything is changing so fast. I really cannot think of anyone being a relevant role model. Unfortunate but true. That's the way I think.
Yeah. No, nothing major to add. I mean, since I laughed at VT's last comment, I have to say that I do echo a little bit of that, right? There is this change that has happened, and there are some parts of the older generation which I would think need to kind of develop higher awareness of that change, right? Whether it is training, whether it is, just broader, more, not propaganda, but more articles, newspapers, or whatever the way of means could be, right? Yeah. And that is one bias at the broader level that needs to get broken. You do still see that sometimes, I would say, I mean, a lot less now, but I mean, a lot of the younger female colleagues would probably see that a lot more, right? So that's where the gender bias needs to break. I think probably a lot more than, with folks that you see in this panel in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that difference is perhaps now moving on to, I would say, the broader generation as well, not just the younger female colleagues, but I think there is a gap that you can start to see in terms of just the thought process. I know we are at the end of time. Maybe one last question from my side, and I'm looking at the audience questions as well, and then we can sort of end there. While I know there is a lot more that we can continue to cover. So I think there is a combination of a couple of questions here. I think one is around just how do you create the cultural acceptance for policies. I think we've already talked about that a fair bit, so maybe maybe we'll gloss over that one for now. But there was a second question around saying, does setting a culture of diversity always have to start from the top? Is there something that we can do at the mid-level to make a meaningful difference while we are as we are going through this journey. So I thought that was a slightly different take on the topic. Maybe we can cover that. And
I think just a small point I'll make is you have to put targets in some ways. Now, some of it can be quantifiable, some not, right? But clearly, you need one person at the top is not going to drive the entire change, right? And so, take recruiting. Let's say recruiting is screening done at the director level and eventually goes to the partner. If the director doesn't do their job, you're not going to get the candidate pool. So clearly, you need to set the right targets. You need to measure people against them, and you need to reward or punish accordingly. But to do all of that, you need the buy-in. So I come back to that overall point, right? They shouldn't be doing it to get the bonus or to hit the KRA.
Yeah. So the metrics and the measurement is important, but the outcome of that measurement is has to lead to the right results. It's not measuring the numbers for the sake of it, which is what leads to what Shweta described as fudging earlier, and some of you alluded to that as well. Thank you very much, Kunal, Sunil, VT, Bala, Shweta, for being with us. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like I could go on for another couple of hours, but I think we'll need to stop now. Thank you. And I think there are a few comments and questions from the audience as well, which we'll share with you offline.
Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for your very interesting comments, and we're seeing a lot of interaction from the audience. I think there's one thing that I will answer for. Kanchan, you made this very interesting question about what male role models should do, and this is out of personal experience, right? I had 3 male founding partners, and I was the only investing woman. And I remember the partners coming up to me and saying, look, there are so many things, and they themselves on their own, there are so many things we cannot answer for you, and we can never be your role model or your mentor, and we cannot make everything lighthouse. And they immediately connected me with women from the industry, because there were so many things that I didn't know that I could ask for. And I think that helped me immensely over the years. And I think that is something that the other firms can also adopt. And hopefully we'll have enough and more senior women in the industry to have role models. But thank you everyone for your time and your interesting insights, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.